Hello, YouTube world. This is going to be a video on the coronavirus pandemic. And what I want to do in this video is give you some clear evidence to show that this pandemic has been planned and orchestrated for a very long time. I want to show you information from 3 to 5 years ago showing you that the world elites have been planning this pandemic for a very long time and that it by no means is organic. The world elites, the Freemasons, the Satanists, and so forth, have likely been planning this pandemic for not just years, but decades. And I'd say if you take it beyond that to the spiritual level of Satan, fallen angels, and demons, that they've likely been planning this pandemic for even centuries and hundreds of years. And some of the reasons that they show you this predictive programming years beforehand of what they're going to do. There's several reasons for this. One, it's lesser magic. The Satanists believe the best place to hide the truth is in plain sight, and they believe they gain power from showing you their plans beforehand. Another reason is many people speculate that it is literally universal law of God on a spiritual level that they must show you and reveal their future evil plans. This isn't specifically spoken in the Bible, but if you've read the book of Job, you'll remember that Satan had to go to God to get permission to attack Job. And the Bible is clear that God is in control of everything, and everything Satan does, he has to go to God to get permission. So it's the same thing with this pandemic that's going on. Satan had to get God's approval on what he could and could not do with this. Another reason that they use this predictive programming and show you their plans beforehand is they do it to mock the public, to rub it in your face how stupid you are. They also do this to show ownership of you and to exert their power. And another means of why they do this is the Freemasons and Satanists, they use this as a means to covertly communicate with each other, to communicate with other Satanists and Freemasons and elites all around the world. So let's go ahead and jump into the information. I first want to play a clip of Anthony Fauci from 2017.
Given, as you heard from the introduction, that I have been around for a while and have had the opportunity and the privilege and the pleasure of serving in 5 administrations, I thought I would bring that perspective to the topic today, is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
So did you hear what Fauci just said? He spoke about a pandemic, and he said there's no doubt in his mind there will be a surprise outbreak that this Donald Trump administration will have to deal with. How in the world would he possibly know that unless he was already part of the group that was planning this?
Challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases.
Let's play that again.
Will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with. Challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why history There will be a surprise outbreak, and I hope by the end of there will be a surprise out diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak, and I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, there will be a surprise outbreak.
Okay, so 3 years ago, Anthony Fauci makes it clear there's no doubt in his mind there will be a surprise outbreak in the area of infectious disease and pandemic for the Donald Trump administration. If you had any doubts that this man was involved in the planning of this pandemic and that he was serving the New World Order, this ought to make it crystal clear what is really going on with this Dr. Anthony Fauci. Just unbelievable. Next, I want to play a clip from a Bill Gates TED Talk from 5 years ago.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If any...
Let's check out that image again.
Instead, it looks like this.
5 years ago, talking about a global pandemic, and boy, that sure looks like the coronavirus to me. What do you think?
If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Now, part of the reason for this is that we've invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence, but we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready for the next epidemic.
And there you go, Bill Gates warning us of a coming epidemic that could kill millions and saying we're not ready for it. Here's another clip of Bill Gates speaking from several years ago. Title is Bill Gates warned us about pandemics multiple times.
The impact of a huge epidemic, like a flu epidemic, would be phenomenal because all the supply chains would break down.
Here we hear him saying all the supply chains would break down. We're seeing that happening now.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. We're not ready for the next epidemic. The impact of a huge epidemic, like a flu epidemic, would be phenomenal.
And here we see this is January 2017, over 3 years ago when he's speaking.
Because all the supply chains would break down, there'd be a lot of panic.
And we're seeing that panic, of course.
Many of our systems would be overloaded, and so we all hope that doesn't come along. But being ready for epidemics of different sizes, there's a lot more we should do. The resources to go engage in the affected countries, the allocation decisions. As we've seen various flu scares come along, we haven't had a super good response. Using the flu vaccine doesn't really work that well in the equatorial regions because you don't get this lead time like we do in the northern hemisphere. But a universal flu vaccine, I think, would be brilliant.
Notice what he's talking about here, a universal flu vaccine. Keep this in mind as they start to really push this corona vaccine. And in all likelihood, they will, I don't know if they'll be able to do it, but they're going to really try to make it mandatory across the world.
Because it would reduce pandemic risk. I also think the human health benefit would be larger, particularly in developing countries, than we'd expect.
Okay, now a clip from CBS News. I think this was, January 2017, over 3 years ago.
Through his foundation, Bill Gates has helped to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Well, today at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, he announced that his project called CEPI, or the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, has 400.
So he's part of this coalition for epidemic preparedness 3 years ago.
$60 million. He sat down with CBS News to talk about how that money will go to preparing for the next great epidemic.
Preparing for the next great epidemic.
Idea is to take a new way of building vaccines that could let us develop in less than a year a novel vaccine.
And he's speaking of a new way of developing vaccines. That's a subtle way of speaking about the ID 2020 alliance with the nanotechnology, the implantable microchips, and all those horrible things that many of you have already researched. And if you've not, I encourage you to research ID 2020 alliance. I'll be speaking more about that in another video down the road.
They're called DNA RNA vaccines, and so we'll fund a few projects to build specific vaccines, but not only will we get that, we'll prove out that these platforms can work, we'll understand the regulatory issues, and it gives us a chance of being able to respond in time when the next epidemic hits. We're in the same situation we were in before, where it takes years to build a new vaccine. But the scientific idea of these new platforms could radically change that, so that a lot of the steps are sitting there ready. The factory piece, understanding the...
Wait and see. I'll bet you this coronavirus vaccine doesn't take years, but that they have it out really quickly, maybe even in a few months. And here you hear him speaking about that. And the reason it'll probably be ready so quickly is because they've been planning this for years and have been planning the vaccine and have already been making it for many years in the past.
Regulatory piece, and you just have to plug in some information, do some quick safety profiles, and then you can get into manufacturing quite rapidly. Well, we need vaccines for a lot of things, not just epidemics. We need a HIV vaccine, a tuberculosis.
Now I want to play this clip from Stephen Colbert's Late Show, and this was from last week.
Time and the social isolation.
When I see the engagement of these...
Understand that your organization is how many organizations?
Therapeutic efforts, safety and efficacy, because that's 7 to 10 will look, so build the fact more important money's almost around.
You try to warn us. Well, Bill,
Okay, and I just wanted to fast forward here to the real meat of this interview.
You try to warn us about this pandemic, and we didn't listen. What's the next thing you're warning us about that's going to happen 5 years from now that we're not listening to at the present?
Well, I didn't want to be right. What I wanted to do was...
I understand. I'm not saying you won. Everybody loses. Nobody wins with this, and I'm not saying that you're...
And notice he's laughing there, not saying that he's not saying that you've won. They're both having a good laugh about this because they both know this was planned.
That this is not an end zone dance. I'm just saying.
And he says this is not an end zone dance, and Bill Gates goes into hysterical laughter.
What else are we not listening to that we need to take action?
Let's play that clip
I understand.
again.
I'm not saying you won. Everybody loses. Nobody wins with this, and I'm not saying that this is not an end zone dance. I'm just saying, what else are we not listening to that we need to take action on now?
Well, the idea of a bioterrorist attack is kind of the nightmare scenario, because they're a pathogen with a high death rate would be picked. Now, the good news...
So let's play that again. He speaks about a bioterrorist attack involving a pathogen, and Stephen Colbert starts laughing again.
Now.
Well, the idea of a bioterrorist attack is kind of the nightmare scenario, because they're a pathogen with a high death rate would be picked. Now, the good news is, I'm not trying to depress you, it's tough enough
Too late.
right now,
Too late.
most of the work we're going to do to be ready for pandemic 2, I call this pandemic 1, most of the work will...
Notice there, he calls this coronavirus pandemic, then he calls this coming attack pandemic 2. Play that one more time.
Most of the work we're going to do to be ready for pandemic 2, I call this pandemic 1, most of the work we'll do to be ready for that are also the things we need to do to minimize the threat of bioterrorism.
Well, Mr. Gates, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for the efforts.
And look at Bill Gates starting to laugh hysterically
You and your
and
organization.
statistically at the end of this interview.
Well, Mr. Gates, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for the effort
Just rubbing it in our faces.
you and your organization are doing to try to find the cure for this. And we'll see you again. Stay safe.
All right. Great time.
Give our best to everybody else in the bunker.
Thank you.
Bill Gates, everybody.
And he ends there with some sadistic, evil laughter like Dr. Evil. And by the way, this clip was from Stephen Colbert's channel, so it's not copyrighted material. Anyone can access this. I want to be careful about that. So concerning what Bill Gates said about a coming pandemic to maybe a bioterrorist attack, everybody's probably been seeing, isn't it convenient that the CDC and the government is coming out warning us about a second wave of this coronavirus in the fall? CDC director warns second wave of coronavirus is likely to be even more devastating. There's a possibility that the assault of the virus in our nation next winter will actually be even more difficult than the one we just went through, CDC director. CDC director warns second wave of coronavirus is likely to be even more devastating. By the way, this man, Robert Redfield, the director of the CDC, what a creepy looking guy. All I know is if I had a daughter or a son, I wouldn't want them alone in a room with this man. And I've got a lot of young cousins under 10 years of age in my family, and I can tell you I would not want any of them in a room alone with this man. Just a very creepy looking guy. Here we see CDC chief says there could be second, possibly worse coronavirus outbreak this winter. And here we have Andrew Cuomo talking about building a tracing army in New York, and that Mayor Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire, has volunteered to help us develop a first ever testing, tracing, isolation program. Well, isn't that wonderful? Michael Bloomberg helping us build the police state in New York. Governor Newsom in California, coronavirus crisis is an opportunity to reshape how we govern. And we've had many politicians saying this. We had Congressman Clyburn from South Carolina saying the same thing. This is an opportunity to restructure our country. Here we have Andrew Cuomo again. Lesson to learn: an outbreak anywhere is an outbreak everywhere. And he mentioned China in that, and the indication that is if there's an outbreak in China or anywhere else in the world, you've got to lock down everywhere. You've got to turn every country into police state. And something to note, and I'll speak about this more in other videos, now they're already predicting, the CDC and the government, that if we open up, these models and statistics are going to show more deaths from the virus. They're already speaking about this, warning that if we open up the country and get back to work, that these models are now showing we're going to have a sharp incline in deaths. Of course, we know that they're faking the death numbers, that they're fudging them and increasing them falsely. Many doctors are coming out and saying they're being pushed and forced to write coronavirus on nearly all death certificates, even if the deaths are nearly unrelated. So very clear they're planning for this second wave, and it'll probably be in tune with the reopening the country, that once people get back to work, conveniently, they're going to push this narrative that there's a sharp increase in coronavirus deaths. So predictive programming there, they're showing you the plans. I want to point out there is a novel written by Dean Koontz in 1981 called The Eyes of Darkness. And in it, he talks about a virus called Wuhan 400. They call the stuff Wuhan 400 because it was developed at their rDNA labs outside of the city of Wuhan, and it was the 400th viable strain of man-made microorganism created at the research center. Wuhan 400 is a perfect weapon. So this was 1981, And Dean Koontz was speaking about a man-made bioterror weapon called Wuhan 400 made in Wuhan, China. You've got to be kidding me. It doesn't get any more obvious than that. Now, I want to mention a movie called Contagion that was made in 2011. The idea of this movie, healthcare professionals, the plot of it, healthcare professionals, government officials, and everyday people find themselves in the midst of a pandemic as the CDC works to find a cure. I've never seen this movie, but apparently what takes place at the end is the CDC comes up with a vaccine that saves everybody from the pandemic. Does that sound familiar to what's going on right now? Oh, by the way, Sanjay Gupta, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, you probably see on CNN all the time, and it's really their main doctor that's the main face of the epidemic on CNN. He was in the movie playing himself in Contagion. Here we see Contagion, 2011, Sanjay Gupta. I want to bring you back to the movie Outbreak from 1995. I remember seeing this movie. Take note of this. Isn't this a funny coincidence? 6.6 stars. Army doctors struggle to find a cure for a deadly virus spreading throughout a California town that was brought to America by an African monkey. And they like to always spread these lies that in this movie it came from an African monkey, like the lie they say about how AIDS originated. Just like the lie they're saying about this coronavirus that it originated in bats. They like to use animals as the scapegoat. Something I want you to take note of, the movie Outbreak came out on March 10th, 1995. Something else I want you to take note of, the movie Contagion came out on September 9th, 2011. That is two 9/11s. The 9th of September, 9/11. September is the 9th month, 9/11. So Outbreak, it came out on March 10th, 1995. And of course, coronavirus, COVID-19 is now officially a pandemic. WHO says March 11th, 2020. So it was one day after the movie Outbreak came out in 1995. I actually thought that it was declared a pandemic on the exact same day that the movie Outbreak came out, but apparently it was one day later. Now, take a look at this. This is in Spain, and this is something called the Fallas Festival, and this is a giant idol or monument, and they're putting a mask on it. Something else that's ritualistic that has to do with this, apparently this Fallas Festival in Spain that is pictured here, they erect all these massive monuments and idols, and they burn them during this festival, very similar to what the pagans used to do in the old world. Okay, next, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Event 201, a global pandemic exercise. Here's a summary. Event 201, Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation hosted Event 201, a high-level pandemic exercise on October 18th, 2019. How about that number 18, a 666 number, 6 plus 6 plus 6? Also right before Halloween. Halloween is Satanic holiday. The exercise, in fact, 13 days before Halloween, 13 Satanic Illuminati bloodlines. The exercise illustrated areas where public-private partnerships will be necessary during the response to a severe pandemic in order to diminish large-scale economic and societal consequences. In recent years, the world has seen a growing number of epidemic events amounting to approximately 200 events annually. These events are increasing and they are disruptive to health, economies, and society. Managing these events already strains global capacity, even absent a pandemic threat. Experts agree that it is only a matter of time before one of these epidemics becomes global. And wouldn't you know, it happened just, 5 months later. A pandemic with potentially catastrophic consequences, a severe pandemic which becomes Event 211, would require reliable cooperation among several industries, national governments, and key international institutions. The World Economic Forum, of course, that's a New World Order group, And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Isn't that just a convenient coincidence? It's sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Finally, I want to finish with this, just a short video from Andrew Cuomo.
Let's use this situation, this crisis, this time, to actually learn the lessons, value from the reflection, and let's reimagine what we want society to be.
Let's reimagine what we want society to be. And you hear Andrew Cuomo and many others talking about the new normal. We can't go back to the old way of doing things where we had freedom and rights.
How do we have a better transportation system, a better housing system, better public safety system, better health system, better social?
Here's the key one: more social equality, that's a redistribution of wealth, more health, better health system, that's tracing and tracking and getting invasive into your life, better public transportations, that's the whole Green New Deal, getting cars off the roads, not using oil and coal and so forth, better use of technology, that's your police global surveillance state with drones and cameras and microchips and all the other things.
Social equity. And let's use this as a moment to really plan a change that we could normally never do unless...
He said, let's use this to plan a change we could normally never do. Like Rahm Emanuel used to say, never let a crisis go to waste.
This is a moment to really plan a change that we could normally never do unless you had this situation.
A change that you could normally never do unless you had this situation.
Oh, that's it. Change. A change that we could normally never do unless you had this situation.
Okay, so it's pretty clear, I hope, for what viewing this video, you see this coronavirus pandemic has been planned for a long time. This is not organic. It was planned. It is obviously to push the New World Order, the global police state, the coming of the Antichrist, vaccines, microchipping, the mark of the beast. The good news, it says in Acts 2:21, and whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Joel 2:32, and whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered. If you call on Jesus Christ, you sincerely mean it and you sincerely seek him, he will save your soul and he will deliver you from all hardships and everything going on right now. And that's what I really want to encourage everyone to do, is to truly seek the Lord Jesus Christ in this time. God bless everyone and have a great day.